The gunshot echoed through the moonless night as Felicity Rowland clutched her infant son to her chest, her breath coming in ragged gasps as she fled into the vast expanse of the Colorado Territory. Blood seeped through her torn dress sleeve, but the pain mattered little compared to the terror that drove her forward. Behind her lay the burning remnants of the life she'd been forced into, a life that had finally erupted into violence when she refused to endure her husband's cruelty any longer. The year was 1876, and Felicity had nothing but the clothes on her back, her 6-month-old son William cradled against her, and the wild determination of a mother willing to die before returning to the man who had promised to kill them both. The cold April air bit at her face as she stumbled through the darkness, putting as much distance as possible between herself and the small mining town that had been her prison. Dawn broke harsh and unforgiving across the rugged landscape. Felicity's legs trembled beneath her as she followed what appeared to be a cattle trail, praying it would lead to water, shelter, anything. William's cries had subsided into whimpers, his tiny face red from cold and hunger. She had nothing to feed him, nothing to offer but the warmth of her body and whispered promises that they would survive. "Just a little further, my love," she murmured, though she had no idea where they were going. Her husband Victor had connections throughout the territory. A respected businessman to those who didn't know the monster beneath his gentlemanly facade. She'd need to get far beyond his reach. By midday, the sun beat down mercilessly. Felicity's throat burned with thirst, her steps becoming increasingly unsteady. The bullet had only grazed her arm, but the wound throbbed relentlessly. When she spotted a cluster of cottonwood trees in the distance, hope fluttered weakly in her chest. Where there were cottonwoods, there might be water. She was halfway to the trees when the world began to spin. William wailed as she stumbled to her knees, using her last bit of strength to cradle him safely as she collapsed. The sound of hoofbeats penetrated her fading consciousness. Death or salvation, she couldn't be sure, but she used her body to shield her son as darkness claimed her. "Madam, can you hear me?" The voice seemed to come from miles away. Rough but gentle hands turned her over, and Felicity fought through the haze to open her eyes. A man's face swam into focus, concern etched into features weathered by sun and wind. Beneath a wide-brimmed hat, keen blue eyes assessed her condition. "My baby," she rasped, struggling to sit up. "He's right here," the stranger assured her, revealing William safely nestled in the crook of his arm. "He's hungry, I'd wager, but otherwise seems fine." Relief flooded through her as she reached for her son. The stranger helped her sit up against a tree trunk. They were at the cottonwood grove she'd spotted and handed William to her. Only then did she fully take in her rescuer. Tall and broad-shouldered, he wore the practical clothing of a cattleman. Not the dandified outfit of a town dweller, but the functional garb of someone who worked the land. "Name's Blake Harrington," he said, offering a canteen. "Drink slow now." The water was life itself, and Felicity had to force herself not to gulp it down. Blake watched with patient eyes, his gaze occasionally flicking to the bloodstain on her sleeve. "That needs tending," he observed. "Mind telling me what brings a woman and infant out here alone?" Felicity tensed. "I can't go back," she whispered. "He'll kill us both." Blake's expression hardened momentarily before he nodded. "No questions then, not now. My ranch is half a day's ride from here. I can take you there, give you somewhere safe to rest and feed your little one." Fear and desperation warred within her. Trust had nearly destroyed her once. And yet, what choice did she have? "Why would you help us?" she asked, her voice stronger now that she'd had water. Blake's gaze softened as he looked at William. "Madam, I was raised to believe a man who won't help a woman and child in need isn't much of a man at all." He hesitated, then added, "I've got milk at the ranch. From my cow, not as good as a mother's, but it'll help if you're struggling to feed him." The simple practicality of his offer brought tears to Felicity's eyes. She hadn't been able to produce enough milk for weeks, living on scraps herself and constantly afraid. "I'm Felicity," she offered, not giving her surname. "This is William." Blake smiled, revealing a small gap between his front teeth that somehow made his rugged face more approachable. "Well, Miss Felicity, what do you say? Will you trust me to get you somewhere safe?" She studied him for a long moment, searching for any sign of deceit or hidden intent. Finding none, she nodded. "Thank you, Mr. Harrington." "Blake," he corrected, already moving with efficient purpose to ready his horse. "Let's get that arm looked at, then we'll head out." With gentle but capable hands, he cleaned and bandaged her wound, his touch clinical but respectful. His horse, a sturdy chestnut gelding, stood patiently as Blake fashioned a makeshift sling to help Felicity hold William securely during the ride. "I'll walk alongside," Blake explained, helping her into the saddle. "Give the horse less weight to carry." The journey took longer than Blake had estimated. William grew fussy, and they stopped several times for Felicity to comfort him. Each time, Blake turned away to give them privacy, only returning when she called to him. As the sun began its descent, a modest ranch house came into view, nestled among rolling hills with a barn and corral nearby. "It's not much," Blake said, a hint of pride in his voice nonetheless. "But it's mine, paid off last year." "It looks wonderful," Felicity replied honestly. After months of fear and confinement, the open space and distant mountains filled her with a sense of possibility she'd nearly forgotten. Blake helped her dismount, supporting her when her legs threatened to give way. "You need food and rest," he stated matter-of-factly. "Come on inside." The interior of the cabin was simple but clean. A main room served as kitchen and living area, with two doors leading to what Felicity presumed were bedrooms. A cast-iron stove radiated welcome heat, and worn but comfortable furniture suggested a man who valued function over appearance. "You'll take my room," Blake said, opening one of the doors. "I'll sleep out here." Felicity began to protest, but he raised a hand to stop her. "Non-negotiable, madam. You need proper rest." He disappeared outside, returning shortly with fresh milk. Watching him prepare a feeding cloth for William with surprising competence, Felicity felt the tension of months begin to ease from her shoulders. "You seem experienced with babies," she observed. A shadow crossed Blake's face. "Had a younger sister. Helped Ma with her after Pa died." The simple statement contained volumes of unspoken history, but Felicity didn't press. They ate a simple meal of beans, cornbread, and coffee, with Blake maintaining a respectful distance while ensuring she had everything she needed. That night, lying in Blake's bed with William sleeping peacefully beside her, Felicity wept silently, not from fear, but from the overwhelming relief of having found kindness when she most needed it. The next morning, Blake was already at work when she emerged from the bedroom. Through the window, she could see him mending a fence, his movements efficient and practiced. William cooed in her arms, looking healthier already after a night of adequate feeding and rest. When Blake returned for midday meal, he found Felicity at his stove, awkwardly attempting to cook with one arm while holding William with the other. "You don't need to do that," he said, quickly washing his hands in the basin. "I want to contribute," she replied firmly. "I won't be a burden." Blake studied her for a moment, then nodded. "There's a cradle in the storage shed. Was mine as a baby. I'll clean it up, give you somewhere safe to put him while you work, if that's what you want." His understanding offering help without taking away her agency brought a lump to Felicity's throat. "Thank you." Over the next few days, a tentative routine developed. Blake worked the ranch from dawn until dusk, while Felicity recovered her strength and cared for William and the household. She found purpose in cooking meals, mending Blake's shirts, and keeping the cabin in order. Each night, Blake would ask if she wanted to talk about what had happened, and each night she would decline, not yet ready to revisit the horror she'd fled. A week after her arrival, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, William sleeping in the refurbished cradle beside them, Blake cleared his throat. "Cattle buyers coming through next week. I'll need to ride into town." He hesitated. "You're welcome to stay as long as you need, Felicity. I want you to know that." She turned to look at him, studying the earnest expression on his face. "Why are you helping us?" Blake's gaze remained on the distant mountains. "When I was a boy, my ma fled with me and my sister after my pa died. His family wanted to take us in, but they were cruel people. We had nowhere to go until an old rancher took us in, gave us work and shelter." He met her eyes then. "I'm just passing on the kindness that was shown to us. And when your cattle buyer is gone, what then?" Blake's expression grew serious. "I'll feed you both for life if need be, Felicity. That's a promise. You're safe here for as long as you want to stay." The simple declaration, spoken without flourish or expectation, broke something open inside her. For the first time since her escape, Felicity told her story. How she'd married Victor Rowland at 18, the son of a wealthy mine owner, believing she'd found security and love. How his charming facade had crumbled on their wedding night, revealing a violent, controlling man who isolated her from family and friends. How pregnancy had briefly stemmed his abuse, only for it to resume worse than before after William's birth. "When he threatened William, I knew we had to leave," she concluded, unconsciously touching the healing wound on her arm. "He caught me packing. I barely escaped with our lives." Blake had remained silent throughout, his jaw tightening at certain details. When she finished, he spoke with quiet intensity. "He'll never hurt either of you again, not while I'm breathing." It wasn't an empty boast or romantic declaration, but a simple statement of fact. In that moment, something shifted between them, a foundation of trust that would become the bedrock of all that followed. The cattle buyer's visit necessitated Blake's absence for 3 days. Before leaving, he showed Felicity where he kept his rifle and how to use it. Though his nearest neighbor, an elderly couple named the Simpsons, was only 2 miles away if she needed help. Those 3 days alone gave Felicity time to reflect. The ranch had begun to feel like home in ways her husband's grand house never had. William was thriving, growing stronger each day. And Blake, her thoughts lingered on him more than she cared to admit. His quiet strength, his unfailing kindness, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled at William's antics. When Blake returned, the relief on his face upon seeing them safe told Felicity more than words could have. That night, he brought news from town, rumors of a wealthy businessman from the mining settlement offering rewards for information about his missing wife and child, claiming they'd been kidnapped. "He's looking for us," Felicity whispered, fear clutching at her heart. "No one around here knows you're with me," Blake assured her. "And even if they suspected, folks mind their own business in these parts." But the shadow of danger had returned, tempering the peace they'd begun to build. Felicity found herself jumping at sounds, watching the horizon for approaching riders. Blake, sensing her fear, rarely left the immediate vicinity of the ranch in the weeks that followed. As May turned to June, the land burst into brief, vibrant life. Wildflowers carpeted the meadows, and Blake took Felicity and William on short rides to show them the beauty of his small corner of the territory. William began to crawl, exploring the cabin with determined concentration, while Blake watched with undisguised delight. "He's got your determination," Blake observed one evening as William repeatedly tackled the challenge of a small step between rooms. "And your stubbornness," Felicity replied without thinking, then blushed at the implication. Blake's eyes met hers, something unspoken passing between them before William's triumphant babble drew their attention back to his accomplishment. That night, unable to sleep, Felicity stepped onto the porch to find Blake already there, staring at the star-filled sky. "Couldn't sleep either?" he asked, not turning. "No." She moved to stand beside him, the night air cool against her skin. "I've been thinking," Blake said after a moment, "about what happens next." Felicity's heart stuttered. "Are you asking us to leave?" "God, no." He turned to her, shock evident on his face. "Never that. I just—" He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she'd come to recognize as signaling his discomfort. "I don't want to pressure you, but people will talk eventually. A woman living with a man she's not married to." "Oh." Understanding dawned, followed by a confusing mix of emotions. "I'm not proposing," Blake clarified quickly. "Not unless I wouldn't presume." He took a breath. "What I'm trying to say is I can build you your own cabin, on my land but separate. Or I could help you get to California, where Victor might never find you." The thought of leaving, of never seeing Blake again, created a hollow feeling in Felicity's chest that surprised her with its intensity. "What if I don't want either of those options?" she asked quietly. Blake went very still. "What do you want, Felicity?" The question was simple but profound. For so long, what she wanted hadn't mattered. Now, standing beneath the vast Colorado sky with a man who had asked for nothing but had given everything, Felicity found herself at a crossroads. "Time," she finally answered. "I need time to know my own mind, to be sure." Blake nodded, relief evident in the relaxing of his shoulders. "Time you shall have, as much as you need." July brought scorching heat and the necessity of moving cattle to higher pastures. Blake hired 2 hands to help with the drive, introducing Felicity as his widowed sister-in-law who was staying with him after his brother's death. The story was accepted without question, though Felicity caught one of the men, a friendly redhead named Thomas, giving Blake knowing looks when he thought no one was watching. The cattle drive meant long days of work for Blake, returning exhausted each evening. Felicity found herself looking forward to those quiet evenings, when she would tend to his sunburned skin and listen to stories of his day. William, now 8 months old, had begun pulling himself up on furniture, babbling happily whenever Blake entered the room. "He's calling you Dada," Felicity observed one evening, watching as William reached for Blake. Blake froze, uncertainty crossing his features. "I don't want to overstep." "You've been more of a father to him than Victor ever was," Felicity said softly. "I don't mind it unless you do." Their eyes met and Blake swallowed visibly before answering. "I don't mind." The moment was interrupted by a knock at the door. Blake tensed, motioning for Felicity to take William into the bedroom. They rarely had visitors, especially unannounced ones. Through the partially open bedroom door, Felicity watched as Blake answered, his posture relaxing when he recognized the visitor as Sheriff Daniel Matthews from the nearest town. "Evening, Blake. Sorry to disturb you so late," the sheriff said, removing his hat as he entered. "No trouble, Daniel. What brings you out this way?" The sheriff accepted the offered seat, his expression grave. "There's been talk, Blake. Man matching Victor Rowland's description's been asking questions in town, offering good money for information about a woman and baby." Felicity's heart pounded so loudly she was certain both men could hear it. "That's so." Blake's voice remained casual, betraying nothing. "Doesn't concern me, though." Sheriff Matthews studied Blake for a long moment. "Some say you've had a woman staying here, a sister-in-law, I heard." "That's right. My late brother's widow and their son, from back east." The sheriff nodded slowly. Just wanted you to know people are talking. And that Rowland fellow, he doesn't strike me as the type to give up easily." "Appreciate the warning," Blake said, walking the sheriff to the door. "You know me, Daniel. I keep to myself." "That you do," the sheriff agreed. "Just be careful. Rowland's got money and connections. Word is his wife stole something valuable when she ran." After the sheriff left, Felicity emerged from the bedroom, trembling. "He's getting closer." Blake's expression was resolute. "We'll leave if we have to. I've got savings. We could go to Oregon maybe, or further north." Felicity whispered. Blake took her hands in his touch gentle but firm. "I meant what I said that day by the cottonwoods, Felicity. I'll feed you both for life. Wherever that life takes us." The sincerity in his eyes undid her. Standing on tiptoe, Felicity pressed her lips to his in a kiss that began tentatively but deepened as Blake's arms encircled her waist, drawing her closer. When they parted, both slightly breathless, Blake rested his forehead against hers. "I've been wanting to do that for weeks," he admitted. "Why didn't you?" she asked, her hand still resting on his chest, feeling the strong, steady beat of his heart. "Wasn't sure you were ready." "Wasn't sure you felt the same." Felicity smiled, a genuine smile that reached her eyes for the first time in longer than she could remember. "I wasn't sure either, until now." That night, Blake made a pallet on the floor of the main room as usual, but this time Felicity joined him, William sleeping peacefully in his cradle nearby. They did nothing more than hold each other, Blake's arms around her, a sanctuary more secure than any walls could provide. In the morning, Felicity woke to find Blake already outside, speaking with one of his hired hands. Through the window, she could see his gestures were animated, his expression serious. When he returned, his face was grim. "Thomas spotted riders about 5 miles out," he explained, already moving to gather supplies. 3 men, one matching Rowland's description. They were asking at the Simpson place about new settlers in the area. Fear clutched at Felicity's throat. "He's found us." "Not yet," Blake countered, his voice steady despite the urgency of his movements. "But we need to make a decision now. We can try to outrun them, head for the mountains, or, Felicity prompted when he hesitated. Blake took a deep breath. "Or we face him, end this once and for all." The idea terrified her, but Felicity was tired of running, tired of living in fear. "How?" "The sheriff knows something's not right with Rowland's story. If we can get him here, make Rowland show his true colors." It was dangerous, relying on Victor's infamous temper to betray him, but it offered something running never could, a chance at freedom from constantly looking over their shoulders. "What do you need me to do?" Felicity asked, surprising herself with the steadiness of her voice. Blake's plan was simple but risky. Thomas would ride for the sheriff while Blake confronted the approaching men. Felicity and William would hide in the root cellar beneath the barn, emerging only when Blake signaled it was safe. "If anything happens to me," Blake said as he helped her into the hidden space, William clutched tightly in her arms. "There's money and papers in a box under the floorboard by the stove. Enough to get you to California." "Don't talk like that," Felicity whispered fiercely. "We'll face this together." Blake's smile was tender as he cupped her cheek. "We will, but I need to know you're prepared just in case." Before closing the cellar door, he kissed her once more, pouring everything he couldn't say into the gesture. Then he was gone, and Felicity was left in the dimness with her son and her racing thoughts. Time passed with excruciating slowness. William, sensing his mother's tension, remained unusually quiet, his tiny hands clutching at her dress. When the sound of hoofbeats finally reached them, followed by male voices, Felicity strained to make out words. "No, she's here, Harrington. Save us both time and tell me where my wife and son are hiding." Victor's voice, cultured and cold, sent shivers down Felicity's spine. "Don't know what you're talking about," Blake replied, his tone deliberately casual. "No one here but me and my hands." "Search the house," Victor ordered someone. "Johnson, check the barn." Felicity's heart nearly stopped at the sound of footsteps above them. She pressed William's face against her shoulder, silently praying he wouldn't make a sound. The footsteps moved across the barn floor, pausing occasionally. Before retreating outside, the confrontation continued. "Your man find anything?" Blake asked, sounding almost bored. "Not yet," Victor responded, his voice tighter now. "But I know she came this way. And I will find her, Mr. Harrington. That woman stole what's mine." "Seems to me," Blake said slowly, "a man who calls his wife and child possessions might be the real thief here." There was a moment of tense silence, then the unmistakable sound of a gun being cocked. "I don't like your tone, rancher," Victor said coldly. "Perhaps you need a reminder of who you're speaking to." "I know exactly who I'm speaking to," Blake replied, voice hardening. "A coward who beats women and threatens babies." The gunshot that followed froze Felicity's blood. William began to cry, the sound thankfully muffled by another shot, then shouting and the thunder of approaching horses. "Drop your weapon, Rowland." Sheriff Matthews's authoritative voice carried clearly. "You're outnumbered." What followed was a blur of shouts, threats, and eventually, the sound of horses departing. When the cellar door finally opened, Felicity blinked in the sudden light, momentarily unable to make out the figure standing there. "It's over," Blake said, extending a hand to help her up. "He's gone." Emerging from the cellar, Felicity took in the scene. Sheriff Matthews and several deputies were mounted nearby, watching as two men, Victor's companions, were led away in handcuffs. Of Victor himself, there was no sign. "Where is he?" she asked, clutching William protectively. "Heading back to face charges," Sheriff Matthews answered, approaching them. "Assault with a deadly weapon, for starters. And after hearing Mr. Harrington's account of your situation, Mrs. Rowland, I suspect there'll be more charges to follow." Relief made Felicity's knees weak. Blake steadied her with an arm around her waist, his presence solid and reassuring. "He'll come back," she whispered, the fear still fresh. "No, madam, he won't," the sheriff assured her. "Seems Mr. Rowland's business dealings weren't entirely legal. Once word of his arrest spreads, there are several parties interested in pressing charges. He won't be a free man for a very long time, if ever." As the sheriff and his men departed, promising to return for formal statements, Felicity finally noticed the blood staining Blake's shirt. "You're hurt," she exclaimed, immediately searching for the wound. Blake grimaced. "Just grazed my arm." "Seems to be our thing." Despite the gravity of what they'd just endured, Felicity found herself laughing, a release of tension that turned to tears as Blake pulled her and William into an embrace. "It's really over," she murmured against his chest. "It is," Blake agreed, then pulled back slightly to look into her eyes. "Felicity, I know this isn't the most romantic moment, but nearly getting shot makes a man reconsider waiting for the perfect time." He took a deep breath. "I love you, both of you. And if you'll have me, I'd like to make us a real family." With William babbling happily between them, as if adding his approval, Felicity gave Blake the answer her heart had known for weeks. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes to all of it." They were married 2 weeks later in the small church in town, with Sheriff Matthews and his wife as witnesses. The story of Victor Rowland's arrest had spread quickly, turning to sympathy for his escaped wife and admiration for the rancher who had protected her. Autumn came, bringing golden light to the land as Felicity and Blake expanded the cabin, adding a proper bedroom for William and a small nursery for the child Felicity was now carrying. Victor's trial proceeded without her presence being required, his other crimes proving sufficient to secure a lengthy prison sentence on Christmas Eve. As snow fell gently outside, Blake sat before the fire with William on his lap, officially adopting him that morning. Felicity watched them from the doorway, her hand resting on her growing belly, overwhelmed by how far they had come from that desperate day when she had fled with nothing but her child in her arms. "What are you thinking about?" Blake asked, noticing her gaze. "About promises kept," she replied, joining them by the fire. "About a cowboy who said he'd feed us for life." Blake's smile, warm and genuine, was the same one that had first given her hope all those months ago. "Best promise I ever made," he said, drawing her close. "Best promise I'll ever keep." As William drifted to sleep in the safety of his father's arms, Felicity knew with absolute certainty that the desperate flight that had brought them here had been the first step on a journey home, not to a place, but to the people who made anywhere feel like home. And as Blake's lips found hers in a tender kiss, she silently thanked whatever fate or providence had led her to this man, this life, this love that had saved them all.